Welcome to Yonkers Voice. We are at Margarita's Restaurant in downtown South Yonkers, and our guest today is Julie Killian. Julie is a candidate, Republican candidate for New York State Senate, and we have a bunch of questions to ask her today. I'm going to start out right off the bat. It's a terrible shooting, school shooting yesterday, Julie, and there are a few Republicans, most of whom are upstate New York State senators, who want to repeal the Safe Gun Act. Now, if you become a New York State senator, how would you position yourself with them?
Well, my heart goes out to the victims and their families. It's hard to even watch TV for the last day because it's so heartbreaking. I have 5 children, and that's what you first think of when you're sending them off. But the things that for gun, people talk about gun control. What we really need to do, we need to get illegal guns off the streets. We need to enforce the gun laws that we already have, which don't always get enforced, and we need to fix the loophole where I could be approved to buy a gun, and then I could just sell it to someone else, and they don't go through any check. I mean, people call it the gun show loophole, but it's really not a gun show loophole, but it is a loophole, and that really needs to be fixed. And maybe most importantly, we need to help the severely mentally ill. And about 4% of the mentally ill population is severely mentally ill. Could be a danger to themselves, their family, or the public. And we're probably not doing enough to help them.
But the Safe Gun Act, which passed in 2013, says that the mentally ill cannot buy guns, cannot get a license to buy guns, and there is this move to repeal that, to wipe away all of that legislation.
No, I don't think that the mentally ill should be able to buy guns at all. But it's part of the problem is defining who are the mentally ill, and I just think there's other things we need to do to help those people. Many times, often unrelated to guns. Many of them are out in the street and homeless. So and the mental illness is a huge problem, but there's a range of it. And the thing I think we need to focus on a lot is there's about 4% are severely mentally ill and really need our help and need more supervision and need more, which is very different than the person that might just be bipolar or have depression. I do a lot of work in substance abuse.
But if these Republican legislators come to you, because there are not that many in the New York State Senate, and they say, look, Julie, you're part of the Republican club, and we really we need you to do a little arm twisting. We'll help you on your bills down the road, but we need you to help us repeal the Safe Gun Act. What do you do?
Well, what's important to me is sticking with my principles. And to get things done, you need to compromise, but that is not something that I would want to compromise on.
There are 2 gun companies, gun facilities within your district. You've got Kimber, which is in Yonkers. Kimber is one of the largest gun manufacturers in the country. Kimber has a contract with the LAPD SWAT team. They sell guns to LAPD SWAT team, and as of, let me make sure I get my notes. I believe it was back in 2014, 2016. It was actually in 2013. The FBI started an investigation against members of the Los Angeles Police Department SWAT team and their Special Investigations Unit. They were involved in selling some of the custom-made handguns that Kimber had actually sold them, and it was illegal.
That's awful.
And Kimber is in your district. Kimber is in Yonkers.
Okay.
Kimber is.
I did not know about Kimber.
Kimber is in Yonkers, and Kimber has been a huge contributor to the Red, White, and Blue PAC Fund, which supported Santorum, but it all kind of funnels into support of gun control. So the question is, what would you do? But you've already answered that question. You campaigned very stridently on the sexual harassment issue. There was a posting in a blog called myrye.com, which was written by I believe two high school students, and it was about Rye High School. In that posting, they state that they conducted a random survey in the school about how many women, young girls, had been sexually harassed in the high school. And according to what they wrote, they said that there were 28 young girls who said that they had been sexually harassed in that high school. There's no way of verifying that, but they certainly have their names, and their names are I did research their names. But if that's the case, if you have 28 young women in Rye High School who say that they have been subjects of sexual harassment, then why weren't more people made aware of it? And if they were, why has nothing been done about that?
I am not aware of this, so it's certainly something I'll ask about. It's hard to comment on that. I don't know if the school was notified in any way. I'm imagining, though, that they weren't saying they were necessarily harassed at school. It was just they were, because it's alarming regardless, but it's something I'm happy to look into. I did not know about this. It
was apparently, the posting was November 17th, and I can quote from the article, from what they wrote. They said that the results, though upsetting, were not at all shocking. Every day we see stories on the news regarding sexual assault, and it's easy to distance ourselves as if it doesn't affect us. The fact in itself is part of the problem, because as our results showed, women everywhere are affected by a society that teaches them to suck it up.
One thing I would say, absolutely, sexual harassment is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form.
And going back to the point of sexual harassment, the Violence Against Women Act protects women, but it also protects undocumented women. And there is a movement afoot by the president to take away that protection. Would you be in favor of that?
I have to tell you, I'm not familiar with what he is trying to do, so I'm not going to comment on it. I'm not in favor of anything that's going to hurt women, no matter what their documentation is. So, we need to protect women. And, I'm a bit more focused on what's been going on in Albany for a lot of years, and there's been a tremendous amount of sexual harassment there. My opponent has, helped, said she stands by Shelley Silver, who covered it up, both the sexual harassment and I think rape by his chief of staff, and people were paid by taxpayer dollars, and it was all covered up, and my opponent stood by Shelley Silver. I think that's awful. And we need, in our society, to stop. It's not going to change until men stop respecting men that do these things. Because you hear, oh, he's great at his job, oh, he hires and he supports women, et cetera, et cetera. It's not acceptable.
Which we've seen in the last 3 weeks regarding the Rob Porter issue. Oh. And the president's been righteously criticized for that, which brings us back to the point. Undocumented women have been given a path to citizenship through the Violence Against Women Act. But now, will that be taken away from them? Will they be sent back to their countries dealing with abusive husbands, dealing with abusive boyfriends? Will they be protected? And so,
women need to be protected. And Shelley Mayer also seated Hyman Montserrat, state senator, after he slashed his girlfriend across the face with a bottle. He later went to jail on other charges, but that's unacceptable. No, completely unacceptable. It's unacceptable everywhere, and it's certainly unacceptable in our state legislature.
Well, a lot of undocumented women are in the confines of that state legislature. You look at the towns that you would be that you would be legislating for. Yonkers is 35% Hispanic. Portchester is 43% Hispanic. New Rochelle is 30% Hispanic. White Plains is 40% black and Hispanic. So a lot of these undocumented women would fall within that net. And while we're on the topic of undocumented, Portchester is a sanctuary city. Now, the president has said that he wants to withhold funds from sanctuary cities. So where do you stand on that?
Well, I don't think we should be withholding funds from cities like Portchester. It's actually not. Portchester is not a city. It's a village.
A village.
They would like to be a city.
Correct me, yeah.
And if I will fight for that in Albany if I get there, because they really want that. I do a lot of work. I was on the board for a long time of a soup kitchen in the Bronx, soup kitchen and social services agency. I'm involved with the Carver Center in Portchester and the Don Bosco Center, all of which serve that population. We have after-school programs. We have a scholarship program where we help kids apply to college, called Don Bosco Scholars, which is amazing, and some of those kids are undocumented. So we need to be helping that community. We really do. They're here. They're part of our community. They give a lot to the community in many ways. And you know, I live a mile down the street from Don Bosco Center, and it's been incredibly rewarding to me to be involved and to help. So
you would not be in favor of pulling funds from the sanctuary city?
No.
I just killed my follow-up question.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm kidding. You are the scaffolding law. You are against the, it's wrong to say you are against, you want to repeal the scaffolding law. And for a lot of people who don't know what the scaffolding law is, basically what it does is it means that if a construction worker has an accident on the job or, God forbid, is killed on the job, then the employer, the company that he works for, is responsible for everything. The construction worker, those who are eligible, would get workers' compensation, I believe, but basically it puts the employer in the position of having to pay for that individual's accident, even if that person was at fault himself. Now,
well, it's only for scaffold law applies to elevation-related injuries. Elevation-related injuries. And it doesn't mean, if you didn't have the scaffold law, it doesn't mean the employer is not responsible. What the scaffold law says is, no matter what the situation is, the owner of the property or the head of the construction firm is responsible 100%. So if someone comes to work drunk and falls off the ladder, that person is not responsible at all. And you know, they estimate it costs New Yorkers $4 billion a year more, and that's one reason that our insurance costs are so high in New York. The reason some companies don't even operate here, because it's hard to get insurance because it's so expensive. When they took it away in Illinois, which I'm not sure how many years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, all their construction accidents went down. And I think one of the concerns about taking it away is that construction sites will be less safe. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Nobody wants construction accidents, not owners, not workers. Nobody wants construction sites to be unsafe. And there's so many laws that govern that. But it does raise the cost for every single New Yorker. I'm willing, I've always thought to get rid of it. I'm always willing to hear the other side. But I do feel like it raises, for all of us, you know, one reason why our insurance costs are so high in New York. And they estimate that it raises the price of every house by $10,000. So that's real money almost being taken out of people's pockets. So it's just much more expensive to do business in New York.
And we're going to have to pause. We have to pick that up on the other side. We're going to have to pause for a sponsor, and we're going to come right back after that, and we're going to talk more about the scaffolding law and Julie's position on it. So stay tuned. Don't go away. Come back.
We're at Margarita's Restaurant and Lounge, located at 332 South Broadway, Yonkers. Margarita has great happy hour specials and an excellent Latin-infused menu. Margarita's has the space and the ambience to host any type of event you like to celebrate, such as birthdays, weddings, you name it. Margaritas also available to those coming out of work that want to diffuse and have a drink. Join us, because margaritas where it's at. Salud.
There's still a tremendous amount of liability for an owner and for the head of the construction.
But doing away with that law, does that not? And I know that you have some construction companies that have contributed to your campaign. Does that not make it easier for construction companies to not have to pay out if a worker gets injured? Because a lot of times what happens is sometimes these guys get injured, they can't work, so they end up going back to their home countries, and they're never heard from again. But in the meantime, they've got brain damage, they've got limbs missing, they've got all sorts of things that happen to them that render them incapable of being able to make a living.
Well, if you're in a union, you have there's a tremendous amount of protection.
But we're talking about non-union people.
Okay, so you didn't. Okay, so you're specifically focused on non-union. So
right, because union protection is a whole different.
It's a whole different. Well, we should probably. I think the whole industry would a lot of it would like to have just union workers and not bringing in on whether undocumented or just non-union people. Period. And I know one of the big complaints I hear from some of the unions is they're bringing in people from other states that are cheaper.
Yeah, it's happening, and it's happening all over. It's particularly in a large some of the properties that are being built in Yonkers are built with non-union labor.
We at the Don Bosco Center, we've done a lot of work on wage theft and helping to protect the people that are working, and when wage theft happens, typically sometimes in restaurants or whatever, where they're not giving them their fair share of wages. And Ann Heekin, who runs it, you should have her on our show. She's amazing. She's done a tremendous amount of work on that and helping that community, which is really really terrific.
But on the scaffolding issue, are you firm?
I don't think that. Well, listen. The things that you're telling me, I have not heard. So based on what I've been told about it and what I understand about it, that it would not change those things. There's still a tremendous amount of liability on the behalf of the employer. There is, and just because you take away the scaffold doesn't change that. It's just there's more of a comparative negligence. So I think we should probably have some more protections. The scaffold law, because it just makes it more expensive to do business here, and that hurts all of us. I would like to see the workers paid more, because who's paying for the insurance? The owner, the construction company. I'd like to see the workers paid more, and not have it go into the insurance.
But then the argument becomes, okay, they get paid more, then the cost gets passed on to the consumer, so it becomes kind of.
Yeah, but at least it's going in their pockets and not in the pockets of an insurance company.
Good point. Good point. I should have a bell. I want to ring the bell. Good point. Where were we? Talked about schools. I know that you have said that you are going to fight for more school funding, and you made a good point where you talked about, particularly Yonkers, where we are right now, the disparity between the school financing. I read a statistic that says Bedford spends, I think it's $23,000 per student in their school district. Yonkers spends half of that, $12,000 per student. So there's a huge disparity.
Is it that low? I thought Yonkers was higher than that. I would have to look up I would have to do research on that. I thought it was higher, but
it may have been. I mean, I don't know if that's
maybe it's less.
I could have read an old statistics. Forgive me if I didn't get it right.
No, I know it's hard. School funding is incredibly complicated, and you try to compare numbers sometimes, and it doesn't always work. It's really complex. I met with the superintendent of our schools today to talk to him about some of the funding issues, and one of the problems is that the state owes money that expense aid is what they call it, that the school districts have already put out, and they're owed money by the state, and the state sometimes just doesn't pay them.
Which is that's. But how do you?
And sometimes they write it off. I mean, I feel for districts, particularly Portchester, Yonkers. They don't have the money to put out for things and not get reimbursed by the state. And the thing that the formula, the way that part of it is written, benefits Long Island and New York City and not Westchester, just based on the multipliers in part of the formula. And it's that they assign us a labor cost of upstate, which is cheaper labor up there, instead of having the New York City and Long Island coefficient. That has to change.
And a lot of it's based on property values too. I think some of the...
Well, they have, it's just a labor, that's a labor coefficient, a labor cost coefficient. And for whatever reason, they have us with upstate, not with downstate. Makes no sense. Because we know it's expensive to be in Westchester, it is Long Island and New York City.
So you're going to legislate to change that?
Going to change that. Going to get that done.
Now, speaking of property taxes and school taxes and people paying their fair share, Donald Trump has a golf course which is in your district, your proposed district, which is in Briarcliff.
Oh, not my district, but
it's part of Westchester. It's in Briarcliff.
It's in Westchester.
It's in Westchester. Trump bought that golf course a while back and rehabbed the golf course, and he is now saying that that golf course is worth, it's a 147-acre golf course, and he's saying that it is only worth $1.4 million. And the town has assessed it at a much higher rate. The town of Ossining has assessed that golf course at $15.1 million. Now, to complicate things, Trump was quoted as saying that that golf course back in the day was worth $50 million. The numbers are all over the place. But the bottom line is that he has now sued the town of Ossining because they are assessing his property at a higher rate, and if he wins that lawsuit, the town will end up owing him close to $500,000.
Well, I'll tell you a worse situation. So this happens all the time across the county. Recently in Portchester, a property was devalued, and I think it's just the portion of the school district in Rybrook has to come up with $6 million. So that whole system of tax, it's called a tax certiorari, where corporations can go and grieve their taxes, and they can do it, I think, for 3 years in total. And what happens is if you don't reserve some to pay for that, like at the end of the day, they can come and say, okay, you owe, we've decreased the value, you owe back to the corporation all this money, and then the school districts and the city and the county have to come up with the money. And it doesn't, what they can't do is go back to everybody in all those years and say, well, they paid too much, and then you guys paid too little, we want the money back. That doesn't work that way. It's a huge, huge problem, and that has to be fixed, because just the way the system works, it has to be changed, because you can't put it out there. They can't afford these things to all of a sudden come back. And it also happens with homeowners too, though. Homeowners go and grieve their taxes. Those amounts are not as high but when a lot of people are coming in to grieve their taxes, which they might be going forward, if our housing values do go down because of not having the SALT deduction, I hope they don't, but if they do, people will come in and grieve their taxes, and it'll be across the county, and it's going to be a big problem that we have to.
But that's the whole point, because the town of Ossining, I mean, they need the bucks for the school system, and here you have the President of the United States who's costing them in legal fees. They may end up having to pay him back $500,000, and what happens if you get a call from the White House and it's like, Julie, I had a problem. I'm trying to sue the town. They want to assess my property at a higher rate. Do what you can to work for me.
You know what? Well, if I ever got that call, I would say no. I was on City Council in Rye for 6 years. There was plenty of people that came and grieved their taxes. You're not involved in that. The assessor and your city, town, village manager make all those decisions. A council should not be involved in that at all. The only time that they might get involved is if it actually goes, most of those are just settled without going to court. If something does go to court, you may as a council have to decide on whether or not you want the city or town or village to actually continue the action in court. But you could never say settle it or you know. So it's a really, really big problem across the county. with a lot of corporations that are asking for their taxes to be reduced. So it's a huge problem, and we can't, the system, the way it works, and how you file, how long you can push it off with your lawyers, how many years you can do it for, is a problem. So that definitely has to be looked at and changed.
Yeah, the school systems are suffering. But going back to the president, which is in the District of Bedford, he has a mansion, which is, I want to make sure I got my statistics right here. The president owns a mansion in Bedford, which is huge. In 2009, he rented it out to Muammar Gaddafi in 2009.
Wow.
And Muammar Gaddafi was, the late Muammar Gaddafi was to speak at the United Nations, and nobody wanted to give him a place for he and his entourage to stay. So Trump had this huge estate, has this huge estate in Bedford, and rented it out to Gaddafi and Gaddafi's entourage. Apparently, on the president's own admission, made a ton of money for renting it out to them. They, in turn, set up Bedouin tents and rugs, and they were preparing to roast a goat on this property in his honor. The town was upset, and town members apparently went in and tried to dismantle the tents. But I mean, I'm making light of it, but it became a whole, it became a situation not only for the townspeople. It didn't become a full-blown international incident. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you have goats on the lawn in Bedford with tents set up and helicopters flying around, and there was very little that they could do. The bottom line is that he still owns that estate. Right. In the District of Bedford, and he still has the right to do with whatever he wants to do with it. I mean, how do you get around that?
Well, that would, you'd have to look. I don't know all the laws in Bedford and what they allow and what they don't allow. Yeah. So you'd have to. I mean, Bedford would have to. It's not a state thing. Bedford would have to decide what is okay and what's not okay. There's all kinds of laws in these municipalities. I'm just not familiar enough specifically in Bedford with whether or not they violated anything. But Bedford would have to take that on.
But I think that down the road, should it ever happen again, and hopefully it won't happen again.
Not with Mr. Gaddafi.
Not with Mr. Gaddafi. But there may be some state. It may border over to some state laws, because you have international politics and the President of the United States involved. Speaking of tents and Middle Eastern cultural events, I don't know if they had hookah pipes there also, but speaking of hookah pipes, there are a lot of hookah pipes that are being smoked in clubs throughout Westchester County, and in some of those there may even be drugs.
Yeah, I started a drug and alcohol coalition in Rye, and I started working on it in 2011. Long before opiate and heroin crisis was talked about every day. And the problem that I saw at the time was a lot of kids were smoking too much marijuana, starting really young, and parents were saying, I don't know what to do. Everyone does it. And I said, well, there's got to be a better way. We got to educate ourselves. Anyway, those conversations turned into a full-fledged coalition called Rye ACT, which is Rye Action for Children and Teens. And we got federal funding in 2015. For 5 years, $125,000 a year, which I'm really, really proud of. And in the interim years, we had 6 children die of drug overdoses.
Which is phenomenal for a small town.
A small town of 16,000.
16,000 you have those.
And most of them were in college, but the last one was in high school. And there's actually a hearing going on tonight about sober living facilities up at Pace, and that family will be testifying. But the coalition and those events really brought our community together to deal with this problem, and the coalition functions to bring the community together, the police, the schools, the parents, healthcare professionals, the media, businesses, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished so far. So for instance, the school and the police now have a memorandum of understanding, which they never had before. We have an Adopt a Schools program where there's a policeman in every single school visiting, talking to the kids, which is great, and they really get to develop relationships with them. Also, when someone underage is caught with drugs or alcohol, they, not only their parents are called, but now they're required to do an education program through St. Vincent's Hospital in Harrison. So and we do a lot of educating. One of my passions is getting kids, like early intervention, and trying to help kids before they get to the point of turning to drugs. And you know, we're seeing, we start in our elementary schools, you know, kids have anxiety, kids, you know, are unhappy with things, and kind of teaching what are the signs and how do you help soothe a child, help them soothe themselves, you know, teach the teachers. So we do mindfulness programs in the schools too, and it's really been really terrific. So vaping has become a very big issue. So vaping, hookahs, it's all kind of the same thing, and it's really scary because the kids are starting so young. So I hear more complaints from middle school parents on vaping than high school parents, and the numbers in our county are really high.
What about the e-cigarettes?
That's it. That's what vaping is. They're all. It's all kind of under the same. There's a company called Juul, so they call it juuling. So kids say to their parents, "Oh, it's not vaping. I'm juuling. That's okay," but it's all the same thing. And the reason that it's so bad is what happens when you have the electronic cigarettes, the juuling, whatever. A liquid goes over the coil, gets heated up to become a vapor, and those coils are metal. So they're ingesting little bits of cadmium and other toxic chemicals that get into their system and will always be in there. The other thing is the liquids, I think 39 out of 51 vaping products have diacetyl in them. That's the thing that caused popcorn lung. It was taken out of microwave popcorn years ago. They're taking that in too. So the kids think it's okay. Oh, it's like flavored peppermint, Mom. It's fine. It's not okay. It's not okay. Not the liquid, not the nicotine products, and they put marijuana in it too. Not okay, parents. Don't let your kids do it.
But there was a law going back. Not a law. There were talks among legislators to declare e-cigarettes illegal, and that kind of ended up nowhere. I mean, people.
Well, you can't. It's 18.
It's 18.
You can't buy them until you're 18. I know there's people that feel like it'll help people that were smoking. The problem is kids are vaping, and then if they get addicted to the nicotine, they want more nicotine, and then they switch to smoking. So it's not. It's just a different delivery system, and it's not good for these kids.
But in order to eradicate something, then you have to make it illegal in restaurants. You have to make it illegal in public places.
Well, vaping is in a lot of places. You can't do it. You can't do it in the schools.
A lot of restaurants still do it.
Yeah.
You go into restaurants. So how do you deal with that? Do you tell restaurants, no, you have to have, you cannot have vaping there? And then that takes
well, there's secondhand. Well, that's why we don't have smoking in most of these places, because of secondhand smoke. There is also secondhand vapors. So
you know, and I know it. But then the thing is that's going to take away from how are you going to tell restaurants you can't do that? Then that takes away from their business.
Well, they had the same problem when you got rid of cigarettes, and things seem to be okay. So, you know, I mean, I care really about the health of our kids and about the health of our community, and it is a scourge on our community. The kids, then they're starting so young, really middle school. I've heard of elementary schools. It's really scary because they think it's okay. So I'm not in favor of legalizing marijuana. Medical marijuana we have now. What I would like to see is a lot more research done on marijuana and medical marijuana, so we know what dosing is. There's many other options to smoking marijuana. There's the cannabinoids. They distill out the oil. You can put them in cream and rub them on, your pain. So we need to do a lot more research on that.
Okay, there is a drug called kratom, which a lot of people I don't think are aware of. But kratom has sort of it's slowly starting to replace marijuana, and it is legal. And there are there's some movement about trying to make kratom illegal.
Well, it can kill people, so we need to really look at it before we allow it. It's like a supplement. The problem with anything is anything in excess can hurt you.
Alcohol included.
Alcohol, liquid, any liquid. I mean, that's what drowning is, essentially, that you just ingest too much water. That's a scary thing. And one of the challenges in the substance abuse world, particularly with enforcement, is they're always coming up with new things, new chemicals. They change the formula slightly so then it doesn't fit in with the things that are considered illegal. So there's chemists all over the world, particularly in China, coming up with things, shipping them over here. So, you know, that is something, I've been reading about that too, and it has caused some deaths. So we need to be really careful. Parents, be really careful about, watch your kids and talk to them about the dangers of drugs, because the kids, one of the biggest uphill battles we face is kids think that marijuana is okay because it's legal in other states. And marijuana, it can change when you start using it early, it can change the way your brain is wired permanently. And it's a scary thing. It really, and that's, I mean, even the states that legalize at 21, I mean, I've read that it should probably be more like 23.
But it's all, but the problem with marijuana, the problem with not legalizing marijuana is that it has driven the Mexican drug cartel, because what they're saying is, okay, marijuana is legalized now, so we can't compete against that. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase heroin production, increase opioid production, and now funnel that in.
Well, the drug cartels are in Colorado already.
The drug cartels are in Colorado.
Yeah, they moved here.
You understand what I'm saying?
So that's a huge problem.
It's almost worked in reverse in many ways. Okay, so you've legalized marijuana in many places, but it's also emboldened the drug cartels to funnel more drugs in, heroin and other drugs, to compete against.
Yeah, well, there's Miss Crystal Meth. I read about crystal meth. It's in the New York Times today. They're producing so much of it that the dealers have so much that they're giving it away on credit. Can you imagine? So basically, they're giving it away for free. So crystal meth is almost the most dangerous drug because
it's worse than heroin.
It's worse than heroin.
But then how do you people are always going to do drugs. People are always going to do drugs, which means that in order to deter drugs being used, you have to have increased drug enforcement. So you in favor of tightening up the drug enforcement?
Absolutely.
And the laws?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't enforce our way out of a problem, but I'm absolutely. What I am not for is sending a lot of addicts to jail, though. If you're an addict, you need to get into treatment. And many of the people that are addicts turn to dealing drugs just to get the drugs, to get the money. And those people, we need to help those people. And it's, you know, in Colorado, you know, we just mentioned their teen usage of marijuana is 50% higher than the national average. And their marijuana-related traffic fatalities are up 66%. So there's a lot of social costs related to legalizing marijuana, because we haven't talked about it, but there's a lot of talk about the revenue that comes in. But there's a lot of social costs, and I know people in Colorado that regret that they ever did it. So it's a thorny problem. There is a lot of things we can do. One of the things that I have called for is a statewide campaign, digital campaign, kind of a flashy campaign about the dangers of drugs that will get the kids right there on their phones where they live.
Well, it's changing the culture. It's also not making drugs cool, not making drugs hip, and not making drugs chic. I mean, you got this back in years ago. They had something called heroin chic, which is an oxymoron.
Oh well, yeah, the model is heroin chic.
The model was heroin chic, and that got a lot of kids hooked, and a lot of kids are pushing up daisies now, which is very unfortunate.
It is. But, heartbreaking.
You're facing an uphill battle. You know, as you're a Republican in a sea of Democrats, and doesn't mean that you can't win. But how are you?
This district is a lot more Republican than people think it is, and you know, I would just say I am an Albany outsider. I'm running against an Albany insider, and we need to change Albany. And you're not going to change it unless you change the people that you're sending there. We expect better results and we don't get them. We need to change the status quo against the old guard in Albany, and on both sides, Democrat and Republican. So I'm a fresh voice. We need fresh voices, fresh ideas, fresh perspective. And you know, I'm a mom and community advocate and local elected official, and been working in my community for 25 years. So I know what the issues are every day, and affordability and substance abuse and, you know, the economy and jobs. That's what people are really thinking about every day, and I want to go up there and rock the boat a bit.
But in terms of being in touch with constituents, you're coming from having legislated, from being a lawmaker in Rye, which is a district, 16,000 people. Mm-hmm. You've got 200 black families there, I think 1,000 Latinos there, hardcore Republican district, and you will have to legislate in districts that are minority majority, where you're talking about people who are barely making $20,000 a year, people who have no concept of Bedford, the more affluent suburbs in New York. Can you be in touch with them?
You know, I've been working in my community for 25 years. You know, Soup Kitchen in the Bronx and Social Services Agency, Carver Center, Don Bosco Center, Portchester. You know, I doing this because I want to help our community, and I want to change things in New York. So if we don't have a good economy, have jobs, have a vibrant place in Westchester, we're not going to be able to have the money to afford to help those who really can't help themselves or really need it. And it's not only the people you talk about, it's also the developmentally disabled. I have a son on the autism spectrum, although he's high functioning. That is a community that I've been involved with for over 20 years. And those people, my heart goes out to them, because that's a really hard battle every single day. So there's lots of people in our community that need help and need a voice in Albany, and that's what I want to go up there and do.
The best of luck, Julie.
Thank you. It was so nice being here. I enjoyed meeting you.
And that's it for Yonkers Voice. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay tuned.